We are going to be presenting on fatigue management and self-care today. So what we're going to do is we have got some time allocated for questions at the end. So if you've got any burning questions that come up, chuck it in the chat and we will address them at the end in question time.
All right, so before we get started, we'd just like to acknowledge the land that we meet on here today. It's the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and we respect their spiritual relationships with their country. We acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Adelaide region, and their cultural heritage and beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today.
Beautiful. So just having a bit of a content overview of what we're going to be covering today. So it's going to include what is fatigue, and how it relates to MS, the causes with both primary and secondary fatigue, and how to manage your fatigue with some general strategies, and how also self-care and fatigue are quite closely related. So what self-care is, and also some self-care tasks that you can engage in. So first off, why don't we just ask who here experiences fatigue? How common do you think it is in MS? Is it something you know is widely experienced? And what are your overall symptoms or how it impacts your day-to-day life?
Alrighty, so next we are going to talk a little bit more about what fatigue actually is. So people who are experiencing fatigue describe it in many different ways, and it's going to be subjective to the person. So this can account for some of the difficulty in identifying and managing fatigue. Because like I just said, as with MS itself, everyone has different experiences of fatigue and can find different strategies useful. So up on the screen, we've got a few different ways that fatigue can be described. So there's physical tiredness, a lack of energy, an overwhelming feeling of exhaustion, sleepiness, drowsiness, and increased weakness. So something that is important to remember is that it can be really hard to identify what fatigue is for other people, and to understand what fatigue is for someone with MS. So for example, when a person with MS says, "I'm tired," the person that they're talking to might also probably think, you know, so am I. But MS fatigue is different and it is real. So it's important to remember that, you know, someone with MS is not being lazy or, you know, trying to get out of doing something. That fatigue is, you know, next level for them. So the MS Council for Clinical Practice Guidelines have a formal definition, which is up on the screen. So that is a subjective lack of physical and or mental energy that is perceived by the individual or caregiver to interfere with usual and desired activities. So the key thing here is that fatigue is subjective. It's your experience of fatigue, not someone else's. So not only does it differ from person to person, but like we said before, you might find that the strategies that you use will be different, and not only will your fatigue differ from day to day, but it will also differ at different points in a single day as well.
All right, so a little bit more about fatigue and MS specifically. So fatigue actually is the most commonly reported MS symptom. It affects between 75 to 95% of people, so it is a huge chunk of the MS population. And of those people, 50 to 60% report fatigue as one of their worst symptoms. So this experience of fatigue for someone with MS can be, as Amy said, very different to what we would call that everyday fatigue, where after a run, you might feel tired, or after you've had a late night, or if you have a cold, that's sort of that everyday fatigue. However, people with MS can experience that as well. But the key difference here is that people without MS generally recover fairly well from this kind of everyday fatigue. I suppose when it comes to fatigue specifically in MS, it's one of those what we call hidden symptoms. No one else can see it or know how it may be affecting you, and it's broadly not well understood as well. So that can make it quite difficult when it comes to family, friends, employers. You know, you may have to continually, or feel like you need to continually sort of explain this fatigue, and you might be getting that response, oh, but you look fine, you look like everything's okay. So it can be quite a difficult topic to broach and to understand how to manage. And that's what we want to sort of get in today.
So there are two types of fatigue that we're going to discuss today, both primary fatigue and secondary fatigue. So primary fatigue is thought to be directly related to the MS disease process. So it's caused as a result of damage to the central nervous system. So that might be demyelination or some inflammation. And then there's secondary fatigue, which could result because of factors that are related to MS, but are not directly MS itself. So now we'll get Amy to unpack these concepts for us.
Alrighty, so starting with primary fatigue, this may be like a little bit of a sciencey lesson or a bit of a biology lesson here, but we're going to have a look at how MS can contribute to these symptoms. So as some of you may know, myelin is the coating around all of our nerves, and it helps nerve impulses be sent efficiently and smoothly along the axon to where it needs to go. So in the top diagram on the screen, you can see that the message is bouncing quite smoothly along the axon to where it needs to go. But in the second diagram, demyelination has occurred, which is what MS is. So that's that attacking of the nerve fibers and demyelinating the nerve cells. And so because of that, it results in a slowed conduction or even conduction block of the nerve impulses. So they can't get to where they need to go effectively and efficiently. Sometimes it takes a bit longer, other times it just stops altogether. So as I mentioned just before, the myelin coating helps the messages to be sent efficiently. And so without it, all these messages are being disrupted, and it takes a lot more physical effort inside of our bodies for these messages to be sent along. So this extra effort to conduct these nerve impulses is what can result in some symptoms of fatigue.
All right. Heat sensitivity is another huge one when it comes to fatigue. You might have heard this as issues with thermoregulation, but essentially what it is when you are experiencing that higher temperature. I know for a lot of our clients, summertime can be a really tough time of the year, having hot showers. That's when you can notice those fatigue symptoms being exacerbated. So this is a really unique dimension of MS fatigue. And what happens is a rise in the body temperature as little as 0.5 degree can really interfere with that nerve conduction that Amy was talking about. And then the result of that is increased fatigue. So some people with MS notice that symptoms, particularly spasticity, is a big one. So having that increase in muscle tone or stiffness can become worse in the cold weather as well. So it's generally recommended for people with MS who are sensitive to the heat or to the cold to really try to avoid those extremes and keep your environment as consistent as possible to avoid those exacerbations.
Okay, so how would you describe your own fatigue? How would you describe it to someone without MS? Do you find, like we've just spoken about, that your fatigue's impacted by the weather at all, whether that's hot or cold? So be sure to let us know in the comments how you would describe it and what sort of terms you use when talking to others.
All right, so now we are going to move on to secondary fatigue. So this fatigue is experienced as a result of factors that relate to MS, but are not caused by that nerve conduction that I was talking about before in primary fatigue. So there are a number of different factors which we've got up on the screen, such as sleep disturbance, infection, exertion, medications, depression or stress, the environment, and also mental fatigue. These are all factors that can be experienced by someone without MS, but for those living with MS, the impact on fatigue levels is often heightened because of these factors. So we're not really going to go into a lot of detail on these factors, otherwise we would probably be sitting in this webinar all day. But if you can see any up on the screen there that are really standing out to you, that you think you really resonate with and you'd like some more information on them, please let us know in the Q&A section. And what we can do is we can address them privately. Or alternatively, you can also jump onto the MS Australia website for more information on there.
Yeah, so many different secondary causes for fatigue, and then we have the primary fatigue as well. But in practice, when it comes down to our everyday life, it can actually be pretty difficult to differentiate between those two. So it's more important to know what factors can contribute to your fatigue, because these are the things that we actually can change and that we can make some, we can implement some things into our life. So this managing fatigue usually involves some lifestyle changes, a new way of thinking, and really an active engagement in self-care and managing our routine. So firstly, it can be useful to reflect on your current energy management. Think of your energy supply each day as what we like to call an energy bank. You start the day with a certain amount of energy in your bank, and as you go through the day, the activities you do use up that energy. So gradually the bank is emptied. If you don't have enough energy in your bank to get through the day, you experience that fatigue. So some of the principles for managing your energy bank include banking energy, so saving as much energy as you can for your everyday tasks, those special events in your life, and to cope with those unexpected things that just happen in life. Sleep and rest are ways of putting energy back into your energy bank. Pacing, which means alternating between periods of activity and rest throughout the day. Budgeting energy, so working out what will you spend your energy on, reviewing your priorities and your standards. And budgeting energy also involves working out how to change the way you do activities. So prioritizing, planning and organisation, biomechanics, the environment, and energy saving equipment as well.
Beautiful. So talking a little bit more about the strategies Celeste just discussed. So just looking at this graph, I want you to think of it as if it's a representation of your daily activity levels. So in the morning, sometimes often people, that's when they can have the most energy or feel like their fatigue symptoms are impacting them the least. So they try to get all of their daily activities done in that morning. So you can see that's what this graph is representing. Trying to get those activities done as quickly as possible before it gets too hot or before you get too tired. Or maybe that's just the way you like doing things. However, we know that once you get that feeling of fatigue, it can't be overcome. So once the body's fatigued, it doesn't recover unless you take a rest or have some cool down time. So trying harder is actually can have a negative rather than a positive effect, because it's going to take you longer to recover from all of that exertion that you've had in the morning. So it's just important to, I guess, understand the necessity of rest and how it's really important to support your recuperation time throughout the day. Otherwise, if you just keep going really hard, you're just going to really feel those symptoms of fatigue, feel exhausted, and in the end, you're going to actually end up potentially achieving less because you're just working in these big blocks, but then you've got to take all of this downtime to recharge that energy bank.
So following on from what Ciara just said, a strategy that you can use to put your energy back into your bank is called pacing. So pacing is what we describe as alternating periods of rest, periods of activity with periods of rest. So trying to keep a slow and steady pace with regular rest breaks throughout the day. So ultimately, it may take you longer to complete a task, but it means that the task will actually get finished rather than you becoming exhausted because you've depleted all of your energy stores and not being able to finish it. So as an example, instead of trying to run around the house like a headless chook, trying to get all of the vacuuming done and saying, I'll sit down when I'm finished, it might be a better strategy to rest in between rooms, because then you'll have more energy left for other activities throughout the day. Like if you're going out for dinner that night, or if you're having people come over, you're not going to have the energy to be able to deal with that if you spend all of your energy in one. So another strategy for pacing is to try and change the task that you're doing. So for an example, if you are doing a task that requires a lot of mental effort, switching to a more physical task that doesn't require you to think as much is a good option. So you could be doing some challenging work on the computer. You've got a report that you need to get done, or you're finishing an assignment, but you're really starting to feel that fatigue. So getting up to then go and do some filing, or going and making a coffee or a cuppa, whatever is your preference, that's a way of pacing that energy. And that's going to make sure that you're regularly topping up your energy bank and not letting it deplete all the way down.
Yeah, that's right. So really being aware of what you need to get done in the day, and incorporating some of that pacing is really important. We've spoken a bit about that already, but I suppose it's also equally as important to then take an active approach to that. So use some planning and organisation to actually think about, okay, I know pacing is important. How do I incorporate that into my day? Whether that be making a to-do list, using your calendar, you might use your phone, actually breaking your day down so that that pacing and activity can become something that's a lot easier to kind of incorporate.
One of the next key points is prioritization. So again, it sort of goes back to that energy, that budgeting energy sort of mindset and strategy of, we'll try to break down activities into A tasks, B tasks, and C tasks. So things that are really critical and have to be done that day. Things that if you get the time or you have the energy to do would be great to do that day. And then see those more trivial tasks of, it's not really something that has to be done today, and you'll just fit it in, I guess, where you can. So it's really important with these sorts of things to sort of know where your priorities are, which activities are most important to you, and what you want to get done for that day, that week, that month. But you also need to be kind to yourself and sort of review your standards. So make sure that your expectations are on par with what is achievable for that day, because we don't really want you to be setting yourself up to fail. If it's not, anyone can do it. We all do it in day-to-day life. So it's just good to reflect and see, I guess, maybe looking on past days and just try to think about what you can achieve in that day and what you really want to get done that day. And again, going back to that C or that trivial, sometimes, like what today's theme Nurture is all about, it's easy to put those self-care tasks to one side. You know, I'll read that book, or I'll see that friend, or I'll go back to that painting when I have the time because I need to do all these things. But they're really important to incorporate as much as you can in your life, especially if it's what you enjoy doing. So we also, when you're using those planning and organising strategies, really do try to consider some of those more trivial tasks, or yeah, just have a think about your prioritisation and what's important to you, but what's also going to make you happy and healthy overall.
So moving on from what Ciara just said, now we're going to talk a little bit more about rest breaks. So as we can see up on the screen, there's many different benefits of rest. So these include preventing the onset of severe fatigue, improving your endurance and your strength. You're able to get more activities completed effectively and efficiently. You feel better overall. And linking back to what we've just been talking about, rest is a really good way to recharge your batteries. So most people with MS find periods of activity broken up by frequent, regular rest breaks more helpful than having one long rest break during the day. But again, you need to experiment with different schedules and work out what works best for you, because there's going to be people who are still working and, you know, might not have the ability to factor in as many rest breaks as someone who's not working, or, you know, someone who's retired or whatnot. It's really important to also rest before you become severely fatigued, because as was mentioned earlier, once you hit that severe fatigue point, it's really hard to overcome. So one strategy that we often recommend to our clients when they can is to plan their rest breaks first and then plan their activities around their rest breaks. Another thing to consider is that there's different types of rest. So this could literally just be sitting down, lying down if you're able to, a quiet activity or hobby like reading, having a cup of tea, sitting and reading the paper. You're going to have to experiment and work out what works best for you, because as we've said before, it's so subjective and different things may work for you on one day and then they may not work for another day. As it was mentioned before, it's really important to be kind to yourself and actually allowing yourself that permission to rest in order to ensure that you know, are recharging your batteries efficiently and effectively. And it's also important to make sure that you pick a good environment to rest in as well, because there are a lot of environmental factors that will impact on the serenity, I suppose, of an environment and maybe make it more stressful than what it should be.
Okay, so just a point that we always like to highlight: resting does not equal being lazy. We want you to be kind to yourself. As Amy has just said, there's so many benefits to rest, and you can actually view it more so as a strategy or tool in your toolbox of managing your fatigue, and something that it's important to prioritize.
Okay, so like we've just discussed, there are many different factors that might exacerbate your fatigue, including sleep disturbances, temperature changes, physical exertion, the type of medication you're on, depression, the amount of stress you're experiencing, the environment you're in, and also that mental fatigue. So one of the first steps to managing your fatigue is to recognize what is sort of, I guess, like we said, exacerbating your fatigue. What are those factors that are impacting you most? And is there a way that you can use some of those pacing strategies, planning and organising, including more rest breaks? Is there some way that you can adapt that's going to work for you and your schedule and your life, but also support that energy bank of yours so that you can do the things that you love to do? So, like we've spoken about, this kind of does really integrate nicely with self-care. So some ways to include self-care into your daily routine might be through exercise, through diet, through sleep, through managing those rest periods, engaging in relaxation, looking at your medication, as well as considering the biomechanics and environmental strategies and implementations that you've got going on. Okay, so it's important to note that these are all going to be subjective for each person. Everyone's going to have different things that they do to engage in self-care, but it's important to go back to that prioritization and figure out what's a priority for you and what's going to help your overall well-being.
Alrighty, so the first one that we're going to go into is exercise, which I know some of you might be thinking that sounds a little bit contradictory because exercises obviously can be fatiguing in a way. But research has actually told us that exercise can help you manage your common MS symptoms like your fatigue, muscle spasms, and also your balance. So the fitter you are, I suppose, for lack of a better term, the more energy you will have to cope with daily activities. So it's important to sort of think that inactivity can lead to decreased fitness of the heart and weaker muscles. So kind of like that use it or lose it mentality. So then with inactivity, muscles will then adapt to lower levels of activity. And then when you try to perform something that's a little bit more strenuous or something that you haven't done for a while, your muscles have to work a lot harder, and then you're using more energy, and then you'll become fatigued. So just because you have MS doesn't mean you can't be classed as fit. There's heaps of different exercises that are out there that can be tailored to people with MS. So you can get advice from a physio, and they can design a specific exercise program that is tailored to you and your needs and your abilities, and that will help you improve on your fitness and then have a greater impact on your fatigue levels later on down the track.
All right, so just some factors and general principles to consider when you do exercise. Avoiding overheating. We've talked about the effect of heat on fatigue. So making sure you're in an air-conditioned space, making sure that the space that you're exercising in is safe, having things like cold drinks to keep that core temperature down, really grading your exercise program, so starting off slow and building up as your strength and tolerance for exercise builds up. A lot of the time, many programs fail because people actually overdo that exercise and are fatigued for the next several days. So pacing yourself is really important. So listen to your body and incorporate a rest break into your day after your exercise.
Beautiful. All right. Another thing to look at is your diet. So not only can this obviously be good for self-care, nourishing your body with the nutrients it needs, but it can also actually have an impact on your fatigue levels. So making sure that you're drinking enough water each day, to make sure that you're nice and hydrated, drinking alcohol in moderation. Obviously, drinking excess alcohol can have those sorts of drowsy or sleepy type effects. And depending on your medication, it might have some adverse effects with that as well. Consuming moderate amounts of sugar and choosing low GI foods, just to avoid those peaks and drops with energy levels. So those low GI products are going to make sure you've got a nice consistent amount of energy across your day. Eating breakfast, again, this is something that's different for person to person. If you find that eating breakfast is something that really gives you that nice boost of energy in the morning, definitely continue to do that and eat breakfast regularly. Again, eating regularly, similar to choosing those low GI foods. It's just good to have that continuous source of food throughout the day to make sure that your energy levels are sort of sustained. And avoiding large meals can also be helpful depending on what is your preference. I like to have a smaller lunch because otherwise I go back to my desk at 1 o'clock and I'm just about ready to fall asleep. So for me, having a smaller lunch and then having a big dinner so that it's helping me get to sleep at night is what works best. And try to avoid skipping meals where you can too. And then maintaining sort of whatever is a healthy weight range for you, whether you're underweight or overweight, it's going to have an impact on your overall energy and fatigue levels. So just figuring out what works for you, talking to your GP, your dietitian, whoever you might have involved if you need to, and just considering the impacts that diet can have on your life.
All right, so following on from diet, we are now going to talk a little bit about sleep. So we're not going to go into too much detail about sleep now because we're actually doing a full presentation on literally just sleep tonight. So if you want some further information on sleep, make sure you tune in for our session tonight. But the most important thing to do is to work out what is actually interfering with your sleep if you were having issues with sleep disturbances and maintaining sleep, and working out what you can do about it. So what you can change to the environment and how you can fix those problems. So some other factors that can impact on your sleep include all of the ones that are listed up on the screen, but also your MS symptoms themselves, your emotional and your mental well-being, like I just said, the environment, and also something that we call sleep hygiene, which are the routines and the habits that help you promote good quality sleep at night.
Okay, so we've spoken a lot about rest breaks, taking the time to recuperate, regain that energy, and this is a really good time to relax. So I'd love to know if you want to drop a comment below what you do as your relaxation activity. It's different for all of us. You've got those active relaxation, so doing something, reading, drawing, yoga, painting, and more passive, which is what we talked about with naps and resting and just having a seat for a little while. So both of them have their benefits. Yeah, let us know what works for you. It'd be great to hear.
It's also important to consider the use of equipment and if this has a place in helping you preserve some energy. So that might be like on the screen, using a dishwasher instead of washing the dishes, having electric can openers so that you're not stuck trying to get the salsa lid undone for that afternoon snack. It might be using a walker or a walking stick to sort of help with that, your physical mobility and reduce some of the strain on your body. So if there's things that you want to explore, highly recommend getting in contact with your OT, your occupational therapist, or an equipment specialist, and just sort of discussing potentially the different equipment that are available and that's out there, just to try and make those tasks a little bit easier.
So also something else that's important to consider is the environment. So this, coupled with that energy saving equipment, is basically our bread and butter as OTs. It's what we do every day. It's what we do with our clients all the time. So pretty much we need to look at how the environment can be adapted or set up to assist you to expend less energy whilst completing a task. So some examples that we can give are, in the kitchen, you might have a perching stool that you can sit on whilst you're chopping up your veggies. There's pull-out drawers that you can use because it's easier to find items. Like, we all know what it's like to have a utensils drawer that just has everything chucked in it. Having space under the bench to actually be able to get up close to it to then sit and do those meal preparations is important. And also a big one is moving items that you use frequently to more easily accessible places. So whether that be overhead cupboards, moving, you know, your Tupperware to there, because you're going to be going up to it all the time, reducing that bending. There's some good strategies. In the lounge room, you might have an air conditioning unit where you can control the temperature. You might have an electric recliner chair that will help you to complete sit to stand transfers if you have difficulty with that. You can adjust the lighting so that you're not straining your eyes when you're reading or whatever you do in that area. So some other factors to consider, like I've just kind of mentioned, are lighting, temperature, ventilation within a room. And then it can also get a little bit more, I guess, complex in a way, and we can start looking at modifying the structural components to your home and more if that's suitable. So it can be helpful to have a home assessment done by an occupational therapist. And they can come out and they can have a look around, look at the environment, work out what can be done to assist you, and potentially do some little minor home mods, like, you know, grab rails or whatnot, or potentially work in collaboration with a builder to look into those more complex modifications of your environment.
All right, so body mechanics, it's another sort of factor that you can just consider in your daily life. Having a good setup can make a big difference to your energy and your fatigue. So it's about positioning the body in a way that uses the least amount of energy as possible. So some of those factors are sitting instead of standing to save energy. When you are sitting, make sure you have good back support, your feet are supported, and you have room for knee movement. So it might be, if you're at a computer, considering having the computer at eye level, and sitting at an appropriate distance from the screen. So it's all of those ergonomic factors that you can consider in your environment as well. And then some other things. So if you're standing with your feet about a shoulder width apart, just being mindful about your posture. And if you are lifting and doing more manual sort of tasks, if you're moving house or whatever it may be, lifting, you know, keeping your back straight, bending at the hips and knees, and holding those objects as close as you can will make much more of a difference on your energy than you think.
Beautiful. All right, so we've discussed quite a bit about heat sensitivity, the fatigue that you might experience in the heat. So to manage the heat, it's good to try and think of all of these strategies and components that we've already discussed. So can you plan and organize, you know, your activities dependent on the weather? Can you make sure you're checking the weather reports and, you know, you're not going out for a picnic in a 40-degree day, but waiting when the heat's sort of less impactful? Can you find some equipment that's going to help, whether that's a cooling vest, specific type of clothing that's loose or non-synthetic material that's going to be more breathable, having drinks close by, cold water, having ice to sort of help cool you down. Going back to the diet that we discussed, avoiding large hot meals, taking cool showers. So just thinking about the different things that you can incorporate to sort of reduce the impacts that the heat might have on your fatigue. And if you find you experience symptoms because of the cold, it would then also be considering what you can do, staying warm, again, looking at the weather, avoiding those really cold days, and just adjusting your plans as necessary.
All right, so moving on to medications. So medications by themselves, unfortunately, cannot solve the problem of fatigue in MS, but they can play a role in overall management. So because medications are kind of out of our scope to talk about as OTs, if you have any concerns of the impact that some of your medications might be having, or you're concerned about combinations of medications or whatever it is, it's really important to have a discussion with your GP or your neurologist or your MS nurse. The people in your corner that have all of that background medical information are definitely the best people to talk to about this.
Okay, so another part of managing fatigue is communication. So as we talked about at the start of the presentation, fatigue is one of those invisible symptoms, hard to understand from the outsider looking in. So that's where communication with your family, your co-workers, your neighbours, and potentially your employer as well is really important. So it's just important to consider having that discussion and opening up that conversation on how fatigue impacts you in your day-to-day tasks. When they can understand what you are experiencing, then they can work with you and better help you as well. As you may know, that some of us tend to be high achievers. We like to be independent. So it can be a difficult conversation, and it might require us to ask for help and have a bit of a change in thinking that, those people that are in your corner are there to help you, and communicating what's going on can actually be really beneficial. So some of the questions that you might need to ask or consider asking yourself are there things that other people could be doing for you so that you can save that energy for those important activities? Do you just need someone to talk to when the fatigue is getting you down? It's such a personalized experience, but being able to share that can help you feel really connected. And think about how you can build that support network around yourself. People to help with the practical things, for example, looking after your kids, maybe after school on a weeknight so you can just have a night to relax. And also people in your network that can be listeners and provide that emotional support as well.
Beautiful. So I guess all of those strategies that we've discussed, whether it's communicating with those close to you, building that social network, looking after your diet and exercise, prioritizing those tasks and activities that are important to you, it all relates to self-care, okay? Which is, again, today's theme with nurture. So it's really important for us to prioritize self-care. So what is self-care? Generally, it relates to activities undertaken with the intention of enhancing energy, restoring your health, reducing stress. There are many things that you can do that relate to self-care, and it's going to be different for each person. So for someone, it might be those stereotypical things that you might pop into your brain, like meditation, relaxation, doing yoga, or maybe self-care for you is something different. It's going out with friends, it's hanging out with your family. For me, self-care is definitely netball, getting all of that stress and frustration out on the court. So it's finding what's going to help you process emotional reactions to things in life, what helps you get through difficult times, and what's going to be beneficial for your emotional health, your physical health, and also your spiritual health, if that's relevant to you. So there are many benefits to self-care, which include, like we've discussed, you'll potentially have a greater capacity to manage the stress. You might be experiencing an increased resilience and potentially some reduced common mental health symptoms. So it's really important to prioritize self-care, ask for help when you need it so you're able to, and utilize all of the strategies we've discussed today, and try not to, when we were talking about prioritization, maybe self-care comes under a C task, a trivial task. So be sure you're making time to include those in your daily, weekly, monthly routines, because it is really important for your overall well-being.
So following on from what Ciara's just spoken about, there are so many different ways that you can engage in self-care. So for physical health, you can try eating well, being active, and getting enough rest and sleep are also two really important ones. So utilising some of the fatigue strategies that we have discussed today in order to maintain your physical health are all positive. For your emotional health, you can nurture and maintain your personal relationships with those people around you. You can connect with others. You could engage in your community. To enhance your spiritual health, as Ciara mentioned, if this is something that's important to you, it may be taking regular time for your spiritual practice and connecting with others who share the same ideals as you. And finally, it's important to make time for you and yourself to engage in all of your interests. So as OTs, we are all here to support you, and I guess for the people here in SA that are watching and our clients, we just really want to help you engage in the activities that you enjoy and that are meaningful to you and support your identity. So for you, this might be, seeing your family, watching movies. Like Ciara, you could be a netball player. You could play tennis, whether that's working or volunteering, if that's something that you engage in. The list honestly goes on. There's like cooking, anything that you can think of that is meaningful to you. That's what we are here to help you with. So it's important to prioritize these activities and find time for yourself and the things that you enjoy.
Okay, so sort of to start wrapping it up, it's important for us to think about how can we actually implement this. You might have listened to today's presentation and thought that is a lot of information. Where do I start? So I suppose the first thing to do is you sort of need to notice those patterns in order to make a change. So maybe over the next week or so, you might want to jot down what your routine is looking like or some of the activities that you're doing, and notice when that fatigue is really setting in, so you can start to make links to, okay, this is really causing me a lot of stress, or this is a task that results in a lot of fatigue. So notice those patterns. Once you've noticed those things, start to plan ahead. Think about, okay, am I going to try and engage in an exercise once a week? Am I going to try and switch up my diet? How do I incorporate more rest breaks into my day? Think about how you can set those strategies in place, and then set goals. Start small, and as you go, you can build them up, make it achievable, and work with the people in your support network to establish those goals and to put that in place as well. And as you go, review it, adjust it. It will take time. As we've said, there is no one magic fix, but it is a holistic approach incorporating all of those things that we've talked about today.
Beautiful. Okay, well, now we might take it to answering a few questions. I'm going to keep my screen on the presentation, but if Amy and Celeste, you want to go through and just see what's been asked.
So I can see that there are a couple of questions that have come through. So the first one is, how do people who work full-time take breaks or rest during a work day in an office environment? Which is a really, really good question. It's going to be dependent on your workplace. And I suppose also whether you have disclosed to your employer whether that you have MS or not, which is 100% your choice if you wish to do or not. But I think it's just going to be subjective to the individual workplace, and perhaps kind of going back to what Celeste just talked about, looking at your routine and working out, what parts of the day you're really starting to get fatigued, and working out whether you and yourself can just do little, I suppose, just going to the bathroom or going and making a coffee, just getting up, those little inadvertent rest breaks. That's what I was trying to say. Or whether you actually come up with a set plan with your employer. It's, like I said, it's going to be really subjective to you and to your workplace.
Yeah, so like we've discussed, looking at those biomechanics. So if you have the opportunity to have an ergonomic assessment with an OT or with someone else at your workplace, to make sure that first, your desk is set up appropriately so that I guess you're not fatiguing your body in positions that aren't posturally that appropriate. Like Amy said, maybe looking at the tasks, if it's an office related job, looking at your tasks, what ones take more mental energy, what are some more calm or less stressful tasks. Can you break them up to sort of have that pacing idea? So doing some more mentally fatiguing or stressful tasks, and then follow it up with something that you find a bit easier, a bit more calming. Like Amy said, again, introducing those toilet breaks, the coffee breaks, taking just a quick lap around your office building. Depending on where you work, that'll be different for each employer. Different places that I've been to, they might have a 5-minute break every hour. So it might be something, again, that you discuss with your employer or you try to implement by yourself. Those would be, I guess, our general tips.
Yeah, and if you are getting to a point where maintaining work is getting very difficult and you are noticing that, maybe actually my fatigue levels or some of your other MF symptoms are impacting your ability to continue your work full time, there are services out there that can be that almost mediator between you and your employer to look at your job, to break it down and to make some negotiations around how your employer can support you so that you don't have to be the one to broach those conversations with your employer directly if you don't feel comfortable doing that.
Absolutely. Now, I'm just conscious of time because the last thing we want is for this webinar to just shut us all out while we're in conversation. But there is another question that has come up regarding sugar. So the question is, does MS exacerbate high-low blood sugar levels? Again, very good question, and also something that I'm not personally aware of. I guess like some of the factors that we spoke about earlier, not eating or not eating frequently enough in the day is going to impact on the blood sugar levels, but I'm not sure if there's anything related specifically to MS and blood sugar levels. But if this is something that you'd really like some more information on, we have an email address that we've got on one of the last slides. If you want to send us an email, we can look into this further for you and try and see if we can find out some information. We've got some nurses that work in the same office as us, so we can pick their brains on the more medical side. And we can definitely get back to you about that if that's something that you'd like more information on.
Otherwise, if you're already involved with a GP or a dietitian or a nurse, that would be a really good question to jot down and ask them too.
Definitely. There's only one other question that's come through about a copy of the recording. We are recording it, and I'm fairly certain for people who have registered, so obviously the people in this webinar, you should have access to that afterwards as well.
Yeah, and if not, we'd definitely be able to distribute some of the presentation slides. So again, there'll be that email at the end that you can contact us at. So I guess then just to recap today what we've discussed, that fatigue is experienced in many ways. It's common with MS, but it's going to be different from person to person, and even for you it might be different day to day. So it's important to sort of recap, do some planning, have a look at what you're engaging in, the activities you're doing when you're experiencing that fatigue, and address those factors that you can have control over by implementing some of the strategies we've talked today. Also, be kind to yourself. Treat yourself like a close friend or family member. How would you want them to prioritise their own health, their own emotional well-being, mental well-being, physical well-being? So definitely be kind and make time for self-care tasks and the tasks that you enjoy and that give you happiness.
So like we were talking about just before, up on the screen here are some of the, I suppose, contacts and resources that you can speak to. But again, and you probably all are aware of this, but your GP and your neuro, your MS nurse, if you have one, or your other healthcare providers like your OT, are all there, like we've said, in your corner, there to help you. So you use us when you need us. Additionally, there's also the MS organisations in your state. So for people in SA or the NT, there's us, the MS Society of SA and NT. There's MSWA, MS Queensland, and also MS Limited. So the contact number and the email that we've actually got up on the screen are specifically for MS SA and T. But like we said, any questions that you have, feel free to email that email address and just, put in the subject header, Women's Health Week question, and we will endeavour to get back to you. But additionally, there is also MS Australia, and also there's the MS UK Trust, which has a lot of different information on there, which although is not, relative to our, I suppose, society or relative to Australia, but it's relative to MS. So it's all going to be transferable information, which will be really helpful for you.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to hear about fatigue and MS. We hope that you got something useful out of this, something that you can implement in your daily life. It is a lot of information, so go back over the recording and the slides or contact some of those people that we talked about. We'd love to assist you further.